Hi everyone, I'm Jess. I'm a fourth year PhD student at Newcastle University, and today I'm going to talk about my work, Do We Need Legends? An Eye Tracking Study. And this work was done with my supervisors, David Fairbairn, Phil James and Ali Ford. So a bit about this work. This work is actually a subset of my PhD, which is titled The Geovisualization of Risk. And it was conducted with 35 participants from Atkins, who are actually a sponsor for this project. And part of their sponsorship is I'm actually a case studentship, which meant in 2019, I completed a placement with Atkins as part of this training. And also to note that this work is also funded through the DREAM CDT. So what are the aims of the research? The aim is to understand how participants from a major engineering consultancy use map elements to make decisions and see if these change based on the individual's background. So the main focus of this study is how these individuals rely and interact with the legend to make decisions. So this includes how they use the legend, why they're using the legend, and at what point in the decision-making process they are using the legend. As mentioned before, this is just part of my PhD, so I'm just talking about kind of a small element today. So a bit of context. In large engineering projects, spatial data is kind of collected, analysed, presented, and disseminated. And this is to a variety of individuals, teams, and stakeholders. So the teams could be people from the ecology team, the agriculture team, the infrastructure team, the transport team. There's a whole host of teams and a whole number of stakeholders, be that kind of local government or private companies. Environmental impact assessments are a key element of these multidisciplinary projects, and they require individuals from these variety of teams to make decisions primarily using spatial data. And this could be raw spatial data from surveys, or it could also be data that has been analysed by, for example, the geospatial team. Within this work, we've noticed that eye tracking can be used to help give an indication of eye movements, but also the participants' focus within a task. So we're able to start to understand their interaction with the map and its elements, such as the legend. So how is this study designed? So because I'm working with kind of an external company, ethic-wise, we had to make sure that each participant signed a consent form and read through kind of a personal information sheet that outlined the study to them and what was kind of expected of them and the tasks that being part of the study would involve. After they filled this out, they then had to take part in kind of a personal profile. And what this was collecting a whole host of information about these individuals. So this includes information on the user themselves, their use of geospatial data, when they make decisions and kind of how they make decisions within the company, and also touching on kind of uncertainty, which includes their association with uncertainty and their use of uncertainty in their kind of day-to-day working life. Once a personal profile is filled out, the study then commenced. This lasted from about 26 to 47 minutes. The study itself was not timed. There was no time constraint. There was no right or wrong answer. And that's something we really wanted to make sure we had within this study. It was made up of kind of 3 scenarios, A, B, and C. But the work I'm talking about today focused on the first scenario, which is scenario A. So scenario A was all about flood risk. And what the participants had to do was rank these 4 areas shown on this map in purple, from most likely to least likely to flood. It was presented on ArcGIS Online, as you can see here, and was accessed through a Survey 123 document. So it kind of worked as a reading comprehension. They opened the link on the laptop and they just kind of read through the document and answered the questions. And there were external links that link them up to this map here. And there are actually kind of 4 maps that you can see tabbed across the top. So as I mentioned, the study was designed with kind of 4 maps, A1, A2A, A2B, and A2C. And as the participant progressed through the study, the data that they were using to make that decision of ranking the 4 areas changed. So for example, for the first map, A1, they were given kind of general location data to make that decision. A2A, they were given the 1 in 100-year flood data from the EA. Then map 3, they were given the 1 in 1,000-year flood data. And then the final map they presented with was all of that data together, but also with a band of uncertainty, which was kind of synthetically created for them to take into account in that final decision. So with eye tracking, you have the stimuli, which here is the maps, and you have the recordings of what the people are looking at. So you've got like a big timeline, but we're interested in different parts of the stimuli, such as the legend, the map, and the sites. And then we're interested in each one of these, each of the decisions, so each of the maps which are shown along the top. So what we do is we have to kind of slice up this long timeline, this long video of data we have into what we call times of interest. So these are kind of temporal chunks in the kind of decision-making process that we can then use in analysis. But alongside these times of interest, we're also interested in the legend, map, and sites, which we call the areas of interest. So for each participant, we kind of segment up their recording into the different times of interest, but also for the different areas of interest. So we can look at metrics across these to see how the participants' kind of decision-making techniques varies depending on what they're looking at. So just here, I've got a short video that's just on a loop that shows kind of eye tracking and how powerful it is. So on this video here, you can see that the participant is using the legend. They then navigate down, and when they find what they want on the legend, they then bounce straight over to the map. And I think this here just proves kind of the kind of information we can get out of eye tracking. The points that you can see, which are like the purple rings, they're called fixations. So that's the juddery eye movements that someone's making. And you should also note that this is in real time, so your eyes move super quickly, and that a lot of people don't realise. So yeah, this is in real time. And then the navigation between each of the points is called a saccade. So that's kind of the movement between the fixations. So results wise, as I mentioned before with eye tracking, there's kind of a variety of different eye tracking metrics you can use. And these are based on those kind of fixations and saccades that are collected, which we then kind of slice up to the times of interest and the areas of interest. So what the kind of metrics that we kind of look at is kind of time, so dwell time, how long is spent on each of the elements. The fixation length, so how long that actual fixation and point on time is, because that can help us start to understand what cognitive processes are going on. Also, we're interested in the number of fixations, because that shows kind of where the focus of the participant is. And then also the visit count. So that's looking at kind of, if someone looks at the legend and then the map and then back at the legend count would be 2 and the map count could be 1. So we can start to see that interaction between kind of the map and the legend.
3 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So results wise, what we decided to do is look at kind of fixation count, because that's quite a good indicator. And the graph on the left here shows kind of the overall fixation count for the legend for each of the scenarios, as you can see across the bottom there. The red line shows the mean, and the yellow line shows kind of the 95% confidence interval around the mean. We decided that because the participant wasn't timed, that it was actually a bit more, it was better to actually look at this in percentages, because rather than the absolute values. So that's what you can see here on the right hand side. And what we're starting to see is that the participants tend to use the map, the legend the most in the first instance of decision making, when they're first introduced to the data. As that familiarity with the data increases, the use of the legend decreases. However, when they're presented to the kind of the final piece of data at the end, which includes the kind of uncertainty data, the participants themselves are a bit uncertain. So they start to then use the legend more. And we thought that this was really interesting. But what we wanted to know is, did this change based on the participants we were looking at? So we decided to segment the participants up into 2 separate groups, which were the geospatial team as a whole, and then the non-geo, which was all people from all different teams. And as you can see, the kind of pattern is kind of exactly the same as kind of the whole group as a whole. But it must be noted that kind of the confidence interval was quite high for the non-geo group, which shows there was quite a lot of variation, which we took as showing that we needed to find kind of a better kind of multifaceted way of kind of defining these groups to kind of see how the usage changed. So what we decided to do was have a little look on kind of job grade and job role. And we did this by dividing the participants up into 3 groups. So we had A, which was the highest job grades, which were kind of the principal level. We had B, which were kind of the middle consultant level roles, and then C, which was the lowest job grade roles. And what we saw is that they all behaved very similar in the second, third, and fourth task. But in the first task, the highest job grades and the lowest job grades perform similarly compared to the consultant level roles. And I think I found this really interesting, but this is just kind of some preliminary results that we need to kind of progress and go forward with. But yeah, it's just, thank you. It's just interesting to kind of have a look at that. So kind of in conclusion, individuals do rely on the legend when making a decision, and this does vary kind of depending on the task set, and it can start to indicate that this depends on kind of the familiarity with the data. Grouping their participants will hopefully help identify kind of key constraints and also tasks for legend usage, so we can start to see kind of how these different groups kind of deal with the data differently, and if this can then be fed into kind of the decision-making tools. And as mentioned, kind of more complex grouping techniques are needed. And we're hoping to kind of start to look more at kind of interactivity and take this a few steps forward. So, yep, that's me done. Thank you.
After I read your paper, I did have a question that wasn't actually mentioned, but in your method, you mentioned you weren't using a controlled lab environment, which arguably would control like external factors if you had it in a lab. So I just wondered whether that affected the tracking, whether you noticed it was affecting the results at all with tracking the eye movement.
Yeah, so eye tracking is commonly done kind of in a usability lab, like you mentioned, which is quite like usually a very stark kind of just white room with the computer that they're using in. And because this task was using this study is using actually real people who make decisions every day rather than a group of students, we decided that it was the most appropriate to do it in that working environment, because at the end of the day, that's where those decisions are being made, that's where those people work. And it would actually, even though there would be distractions of people on the phone or people walking past, meetings, calls, that actually made it more realistic. To be honest, I didn't find any issues with the eye tracking itself. The only issue I found was once is someone's desk had, the light was coming in kind of from the side, which meant that the eye tracker works with infrared and it was struggling to kind of see the person. And I just asked them if they would happily move to another desk, which at Atkins, it's all hot desking, so it was fine. And I don't feel like that impacted the results. But even though it's seen as kind of less controlled, it's almost more realistic. So yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. We do have a question from Bruce here. Very interesting study. Can you use results to guide better cartography? Can you expand on next steps as well?
I think rather than better cartography, it's more to do with kind of what is included on the maps. So at the moment, a lot of maps on these big projects have like hundreds and hundreds of layers of data, and because they think actually people will just see what they want, but a lot of the time I think people tend to get lost in that. So I think it will be more giving kind of indications on how they can kind of streamline the process. So in scenario B, which is what I'm looking at next, that's kind of my next steps, and that's where I'm looking at that more. I've given the participants loads and loads of data to rank kind of 3 cable routes across the Isle of Wight, where they have to rank from kind of highest environmental impact to lowest environmental impact. And that's given them lots of data. And what I'm interested to see there is what data the individuals use to make that decision, because rather than it being fixed, like the first tasks, they've got a lot more kind of free, like they're free to kind of use the data what they want. And what I'm hoping to do from that is to calculate an interactivity score for each of the participants to see how they interact with the data, how they click, they scroll, they use it, which can hopefully feed back into Atkins to show, look, for example, the ecologists really focus on the satellite imagery and the rivers and the forests. So you should include satellite imagery in your decision making. So it's kind of hoping to influence it that way. Yeah.
Brilliant. Bruce has just replied saying hundreds of layers sounds like bad to me. So it sounds like you can certainly inform the process.
Yeah.
We've got another question from Nick here. Have you seen if the order of the items on the legend is important? In your short clip, it seemed it might be.
So for the first scenario that I created that was synthetic, I actually ordered the legend and used the exact same cartography that Atkins use, because I didn't want to confuse the participants, to make it kind of similar to what they use in their day-to-day, but not the same and not completely different. So I tried to kind of get that balance. So I haven't focused on kind of the order of the items in the legend. That could be something to do. But I did just use what they use to try and make it sure that the participants weren't kind of, they weren't cognitively overloaded kind of thing.
Great.